Hello, interwebs, and welcome to Close Up. I'm your co-host, Joe.
And I'm Ryan.
Today, we're talking about Dune Part 2. Full spoilers ahead. So, let's start by getting into our medium shot from our extreme long shot now. And what was your expectations going into Dune Part 2?
I remember watching the first movie, not in theaters, because it was around the pandemic time, and I couldn't find anybody to go with. And I was busy doing other stuff. And then it just popped up on Netflix one day, and I was like, oh, I should finally watch it. And I watched it, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's cool. Not much happened. You can tell it's a setup for like a sequel or a trilogy. It's definitely the appetizer you get before the main course. But I was pretty excited to see more of it. Yeah, that's basically my experience with Dune. So I was pretty hyped when when Dune Part 2 was coming out. Sucks it got delayed for like 6 months, 5 months because of the writer's strike, but finally got to see it.
Yep, I had no background with Dune when I watched the first one. I did actually get a chance to see it in theaters at the time, and I was blown away at the time. It was the most beautiful movie I'd ever seen. What Denis Villeneuve accomplished visually with that left me breathless, and I couldn't wait to see what he'd do with number 2 or 3. It actually shocked me when I was in theater. I remember seeing Dune Part 1 show up on the title card, because up to that point, all the marketing had made it seem like this was just going to be a one and done adaptation of Dune. I don't believe they'd even greenlit 2 and 3 at that point. So to see Dune Part 1, it kind of set me up early. Ooh, I'm settling in for an epic here that's going to carry on for a couple movies. So just right away with that title card, I knew, okay, it's probably going to be a cliffhanger. I'm mentally prepared. And I agree with you in that not as much happens in Part 1 as Part 2, but I think Part 1 was still an incredible setup. And see, that's the problem, right? Because you're basically adapting half a novel. The novel in its original, I mean, we did our thing on adaptations a couple episodes ago, so you kind of know what we think about that. But just to reiterate, translating from one medium to another is difficult. So to go from an entire novel, which is one work in its own right, that you read it start to end, you have a whole story. Dune Part 2 somehow had to adapt half that story and still be considered good for the medium of film, in that it had to be a satisfying, complete movie, which I think it accomplished very well, albeit leaving a setup for a Part 2. But personally, this Dune Part 1 and 2 should be watched as maybe a 6-hour movie adaptation of the book. They're not really two different movies. They can be seen that way, and they were released that way, but they're really one movie. Kind of like Kill Bill. So now let's get into our close-up and talk about Dune Part 2. Or we can even talk about 1 at some point, probably. Spoiler warning for 1, but if you haven't watched it, what are you doing watching Part 2 or a review for 2? Because we never got to talk about 1 at the time. But first impressions of 2? Incredible.
I loved it. Yeah, it was great.
It's a masterpiece, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Just everything. No, you go.
It took me a minute to sort of like understand the ideology of Dune, and then I realized, oh, like it's a book. The original book was out in like 1965, so this is kind of like a building block for some of the big blockbusters now, especially Star Wars. Star Wars steals so much from Dune, or borrows, I should say. I shouldn't say steal. Or else I steal. I don't care. But just it took me a minute to like buy into the idea of what the Dune's message was, because I didn't fully understand it. But then as the story went on, it just became more impactful for me. And I think Denis did an excellent job of showing the author's real intention with the first book, and
Yes.
and just told the message beautifully, and how he didn't want Paul to seem like a heroic savior. He wanted him to be more of like this anti-hero who's kind of using the religious prophecy, who he knows is fake, who he knows is made up by his mother's people and
The Bene
the whole
Gesserit.
religion, the Bene Gesserit. So he just uses that in order to gain control for his own sake. And I thought that was an interesting take for like a protagonist. It's I think it's more interesting than most like hero savior, like just basic hero savior tropes. It's funny because the author, I can't remember his name for some reason.
Frank
What's his
Herbert.
name? Frank Herbert. People mistook the message so much of how Paul is a hero that he wrote the sequels to make him look so much more of a dick or just a worse person, which
Yeah.
I thought was really funny. But
Well,
I loved this movie. I loved how simple the action was. And I loved how I could not tell if there was, obviously there were, but nothing looked like a visual effect. Everything
it all
looked
looked
real.
so seamless.
Everything looked in camera.
Yeah. Even being a film guy who knows roughly how they can do a lot of things, not that I'm hugely well versed, mind you, in special effects work, but I had my jaw on the floor for big chunks of this movie thinking, how the hell did they do that? Like, one of the first ones I remember is early on when there was that scene of the, I think it was the Harkonnens who were hunting Paul and Jessica and the Fremen, and they used their jetpacks to fly up the hill. And I'm like, okay, well, if you kept it tight on them, all right, it would be CGI or whatever, or a green screen backdrop. And then they zoom way out so you can see them jetpacking up the giant hill and landscape, and the camera just keeps going up. And I'm like, this is either seamless CG or the set designers went way above and beyond. I don't know. I can't really tell what it is with this movie. Are the sets just that big? Were they filming on location in some places and just doing fantastic stunt work? Or was it just CGI that's so lifelike I couldn't tell? Because 99% of the time I couldn't tell. And that's a marker of incredible work, personally, when I take a look at it, and it looks real. If you told me most of this movie was practical, I'd believe you, because it looked photorealistic and acted that way. I never really got that uncanny valley effect you often get, even with practical effects sometimes. I was just fully immersed in this world and what I was seeing.
Yeah, it was, excuse me, it was all just like visually stunning and visually pleasing to the eye. Even though I have to admit, I'm kind of sick of sand planets now. I'm getting tired of them. It's boring. And I blame a lot on Star Wars media for doing that, especially the video games. Like even the new Jedi Survivor game, we have to go to another desert planet to explore. I'm like, really? This is like the 4th desert planet in canon. And it's just, I'm getting sick of them. But visually, this still looked stunning. Even the way people are shot on camera, it's very immersive and you're very in your face, but it's also like a different type of close up. It's hard to explain. It's like not just like a boring over the shoulder shots or whatever. Like everything is almost a piece of art, every single shot. And that's just probably because Denis had storyboarded this movie since he was a kid. Like this has been his passion project since like the 80s. So that's why everything looks stunning. That's why everything looks fantastic. And it makes me wonder if this movie came out last year, what the award season race would have looked like if Dune was up there as well. If it was also probably nominated for Best Picture or a lot of the technical stuff.
Yeah. It definitely would have been nominated for Best Picture. I think Austin Butler and Zendaya should have gotten nominated for something.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, maybe Javier Bardem. He was really good too. As Stilgar. I thought it
Yeah,
was
I
a really
guess.
look for characters like that. They don't usually stand out as much to me.
Yeah, just doesn't have that many scenes for me
Well, that's
personally.
why I think
Dominate
he's
him.
impressive because he did a lot with a little.
Right.
Everybody in this cast manages to make themselves pretty memorable, even if they didn't get a whole lot of stuff to do. So it was just performances were excellent all around.
Yeah, the acting in this movie is stellar, and I think it's also a testament to how much Timothy Chalamet has grown as well. Because in
Mm-hmm.
the first movie, I think he's still like early 20s. That's how young he was, because this came out like 3 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
you can sort of see him like starting to, he's still a fantastic actor at that age, but he's starting to hone in on his craft a little bit. And now, jump 3 years later, he's sort of perfected it. He's got this, he's more grand. He's able to do these big speeches very well and portray himself as this grand leader while still being, true to the character of Paul. And I thought he did amazing. I thought his acting from the first movie to the second movie, it's leagues better in part two. So I think everybody has grown beautifully in terms of their acting and their performances from the first movie to the second, which is good because you don't want to see a regression.
For sure. For me, the standout in this film was Austin Butler as Fade Ratha Harkonnen.
Yeah.
I've never heard a vocal performance quite like this in a live action movie. He was stunning with how he managed to so seamlessly replicate Stellan Skarsgård's vocals. Sometimes when they were in the same scene together, talking to one another, I'm like, wait, who's that talking again? That's how close they were. Even when they're in the same room. And it really firmly made me believe that Fade Ratha is the Baron's nephew. That familiar relation felt all the more close just because of that. I don't want to call it an impersonation, but it makes me realize, okay, so compared to somebody like, okay, who's Dave Bautista's character again? I have a cast list.
I don't
Glossu
remember.
Raban.
Big bald man.
Yeah, so compared to Dave Bautista, who was kind of just doing his own thing, you can tell that Fade Ratha grew up a lot more closely with the Baron. He spent way more time with him, and is way closer to this person, and maybe wants to prove himself more to him. And also because the Baron's a disgusting and vile human being, you can tell Fade probably learned a lot from him. I like how brutal both characters are. They just murder their servants for fun, slit their throats. Just for amusement.
Fade was an insane character, and I didn't know what I was expecting from Austin Butler's performance. Again, he's a fantastic actor. We all know this from Elvis, but just seeing him be just this straight up vile, evil, scary antagonist for Paul, I thought was really well done. I thought his introduction was well done, just to show, without telling you who Fade Ratha is. It's like the perfect example of show don't tell. It's like he's getting ready for the gladiator match. He's testing out the new knives on like random servants. He's got weird concubines in the corner that are kind of like into his killing. He's ripped. He's absolutely just not an ounce of fat on him. You can tell he's insane. It's just a great character introduction, and then his fighting style is also, it's
Vicious.
weirdly animalistic, but also tactile at the same time. It's beautifully well done.
But it's also a show of character that during the fight, he's disappointed to see that his opponents are drugged and it's basically a fixed match. And then there's the one who isn't drugged and he throws off his shield and he's like, no, I want some actual danger here. This whole thing is set up for me, but just for myself, I want to show that I'm capable of facing an opponent like this.
Yeah,
So he's
exactly. He
got,
wants to. It's the whole like story arc of like he wants a worthy opponent, right? It's
yeah,
just it's he just wants something worthy to fight, and I think this movie sets up the final confrontation between Fade and Paul so well that that fight has just so much tension. And also that fight at the end is filmed exceptionally well or just edited well because there's like no music in the background. And I thought
yes.
that added to the tension as well, which is amazing.
I thought this whole
Um,
movie was edited very well. It's the editors had me in the palm of their hand the entire time, personally. They really let the scenes breathe, which is something I appreciated. You might expect Dune to be an action-forward franchise, and we have grown accustomed to thinking of action as super quick, lots of cuts every which way, throw 5 different angles for a 2-second scene. But the editors in this movie let every scene play out, maybe even a longer than you'd expect. Just a little bit. Just to build, sometimes with music, sometimes without music. But it let the tension build. Sometimes we held on silence longer than was comfortable. And that made it all the more impactful when something actually happened. It's leaving the audience in anticipation. It's not just throwing so much at us to keep us engaged. It's trusting that we're already interested in what's happening and it can hold our attention by going a little bit slower and more methodical. And for me, it did.
yeah,
One,
it's so well edited
yeah,
that I think it's a testament also to how great it's shot and the way it's written and the way it's acted to that
yes,
the editors are like, oh yeah, we'll just hold on this moment because of it just makes sense and it looks beautiful and everything about the scene is great. You can tell so many times when an editor just cuts a scene short because in in some movies or TV shows because there's just nothing afterwards or they need to get away from the scene quickly.
yeah,
But there's almost every scene is important. Almost every scene is, I don't want to say perfect, but it's just information gathering for the entire world and everything about it is great.
yeah. I just had one example about their building of tension was that throne room scene by the end when all the Fremen are attacking the Emperor's base and you get to see some of the action outside. But then for a really long time, they put us inside the throne room and just listen to the battle happening outside while the Emperor's guards start getting nervous, knowing deep down that they're screwed and that their enemies are going to kick open the doors any second. It was a pretty brilliant decision, I thought, to put the focus inside, where most directors, I think, would have liked to focus on the outside battle, because action, spectacle, that's what you think we're here for, but that's not the more interesting place to show. It's about the fear and the tension. That's what this movie's going for. The action is great when we get it, but it's never the point is never action for action's sake. It's always got an ulterior motive. Like even in that arena fight, like I was saying, the action is to show the brutality, the viciousness. His also his pride throwing down his shield. Or when the Fremen are trying to destroy those excavators. One of my favorite action scenes was when Paul and Chani have to take down the that helicopter thing to show their resourcefulness. How they have to get past the shield. Like, okay, you go over here and bait them out because the shield only goes down when the machine gun's off. So we gotta bait them out and then shoot the bazooka through the shields while the walker's trying to step on us. And I love stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that was a pretty tense scene. I also loved how I just love like the world building too. All the different weapons are so cool. Like the one laser gun that just absolutely decimates people. And I think in the book, those laser guns like go through shields because they're so hot. No, if they shoot a shield, then everybody blows up. Like everybody in the room blows up or something like that. I think I read that somewhere. Yeah, that scene with the walker and they're trying to take out like the helicopter thing and the gun they use, it's like a giant shotgun that shoots out machine gun bullets. It's really strange, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
I loved everything about this movie. I will say though, some of the knife fights, and this is just a problem I have with modern media. They do a lot of handheld cutting back and forth between perspectives instead of letting the choreography take over the scene sometimes. Sometimes it's a little too jump cutty.
That said, I think it's still a lot better than most things we get.
Oh, for sure.
I still think
like sometimes they let the choreography go through, but a lot of time it's just like a lot of over the shoulder. It's just like a lot of over the shoulder shit that I'm like, it's fine. Yeah. I'm not too harsh on this movie for doing it.
I mean,
because it's actually better than most movies and TV shows that do it.
Basically a perfect movie, and you're right to be a little nitpicky if we have to say anything bad about it.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Well, going back to what you were saying about the props and the costumes and the production design, all that's excellent as well. Somehow, even on this desert planet, everywhere feels distinctive. The Harkonnens planet, that black and white place, that's super distinctive.
I love that scene.
And even their ships, the dark metallic look. Then there's the Emperor's home planet, those like the green gardens, that seems really peaceful. It's got this nice vibe. And then you get to Dune, even the Arrakis desert feels different than the Fremen temples that we see. The north feels different than the south. Everything is unique and makes it feel like, oh, this is just a world that exists. Nothing felt cheap or lazy or phoned in. It was all made with love. And I'd like to think respect for the source material, even though I don't know it. But it seems like a worthy translation for a visual medium.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've researched, there's only been like small changes here or there. Like Fate's supposed to have hair in the original, but he made a choice to make him look like Stellan Skarsgård's character, the Baron, in this, and I think it translates well. Yeah, I think it's just a bunch of little stuff. I don't think there's any major plot points that happen. I know there's a character in the first movie that's supposed to be a male, and that person dies in a different way. But I don't, it's not that important, to be honest. But other than that, yeah, nothing too major.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's talk about the plot somewhat. I think the big idea of this movie is about religion and how it impacts a society. I thought this movie was the story was very subversive about the chosen one. The chosen one cliche. Usually the chosen one is, okay, they're the person meant to save everybody and do everything and just be the most special person ever. And Paul is that, but not because he's inherently special. It's because the Bene Gesserit spent generations ensuring he'd be that guy. Basically through selective breeding and politicking, making sure this is the guy who's going to do what we want, when we want it. And also the idea of this chosen one prophecy, this religion, we made that too. We go to places like people like the Fremen and get into their culture generations ago and instill this. They basically did Inception on the Fremen. They planted this seed of an idea for this oppressed people that a savior would come. It's a savior of their making. But sure, they'll come eventually. And when they do, you bow down before them, you serve them, and bring freedom to your people. And I like how at first Paul didn't really want anything to do with that. He's like, no, I'm not taking advantage of this. Like, I'm working with them. We had the same goals. I'm looking for freedom for them because I do respect this culture and this people. And it's also a bonus that I get my vengeance. And then his mother is pushing this idea very heavily. No. You gotta take control. You gotta be the leader that you were born to be so that we can get control back. This is our ticket. And then in the end, when he realizes they're Harkonnens, which was an incredible twist, by the way, that's when he realizes, oh, so Arrakis was promised to the Harkonnens, and if I'm the last living Harkonnen, then, oh, well, if I kill them all, then Arrakis is basically just mine, right? And, okay, but how do we do that? How do we get a chance to prove that? Okay, well, I guess I have to take over the Fremen and lead them all in a big charge. So this is where his selfishness kind of starts to get in the way, where his quest for vengeance is maybe overruling all the devastation he knows is going to come from it. But he is also on some level fighting for the Fremen still. He also knows that if he doesn't do this, they're just going to keep being rats out in the desert, popping out from the sand and fighting an enemy who will not stop. If they don't get everyone together for one big assault, they might not get another chance. They'll always be on the run. So this is, if they don't do this, they might not win freedom after all. So for freedom and for his vengeance, he does the one thing he really doesn't want to do because he knows it's the only way. Being able to see all the futures. So it's a very interesting play on the Chosen One prophecy because he doesn't want anything to do with it. But also because of the way everything was set up, it's the only reasonable path that'll have him get what he wants. So he's like, crap, I gotta play into this. This sucks.
Well, yeah. You forgot to mention the most important part of why he turns to take over the Fremen. He got high as fuck. And then you realize from all his visions become clearer or whatnot. But yeah. Yeah, it's a great way just to show how, like, the character growth of Paul, where he's like, he knows he has to take power of the Fremen in order to get his revenge, but he's afraid of what that power will do to him. And at the end of the day, he just gives in. He's just like, fuck it, I have to do this in order to seek the vengeance I want. There is no other way. Either I do this or we all die. And it's this sort of just like gray morality that he has about him, and I love that in a protagonist. Yeah. Just to see that that he can do sort of these schemy things in order to get what he wants, and it fucks over some of the people he loves, but also brings him absolute power, like the thing that he feared, but the thing that he kind of needs, because talk about destiny, whatever he's Paul Atreides, he's part Harkonnen, he has this strong bloodline, and he is somewhat destined to be, on top of the entire universe. And it's just crazy.
Well, that's just the big problem, right? If it was just, okay, let's kick off the Harkonnen from Arrakis, get our freedom, okay, sure, that'd be great. Except he knows it's going to be a domino effect. It's not going to stop there. It's not going to stop till the galaxy's on fire and in war, and he's this religious savior figure who's going to lead his people to massive death and destruction and genocides maybe. Just he's going to burn the galaxy down if he starts this domino effect, but he's like, I guess I gotta. It's a risk he's willing to take in the end, which, like you said, speaks to the moral gray of it. It's like, well, would you commit all these atrocities knowing that it's going to happen that way? And he still does.
After I got high as fuck, probably. I mean, you don't know how powerful that worm juice is. You've never tried it. It kills all the men.
Yep.
except Paul, obviously, because he's special.
Because he's the chosen one. And Johnny.
No, it's
saved him.
because this is the daughter of the Bene Gesserit, and then blah blah blah. Yeah. And it's just funny because and I was talking to somebody recently about this, but isn't it, if it is a prophecy, then all came true? It's like, no, that's just how powerful the Bene Gesserit are. They just have these powers that are they are able to see into the future because of spice. It's a very powerful, it's their currency for space travel, but it's also able to give humans some supernatural powers. They're able to see glimpses into the future. They orchestrated so many powerful bloodlines to do their bidding. You can see them constantly throwing themselves at different bloodlines. They did that with Paul's mom, threw her at the Duke beforehand. I think Leon. I can't remember the dad's name.
I don't remember now.
Leto Atreides. I think that's what it is. Yeah. And they did that with Fade Rafa. Implanted one of the Bene Gesserits with her and got her pregnant. The original plan apparently was to have Leto and Jessica to have a daughter, so that daughter could be married off to one of the Harkonnens, and then they join together, take over the entire galaxy. But then Leto wanted a son, so Jessica got rid of her, Bene Gesserit duties and pleased her family instead. So there's great conflicts between the entire world and just also the Bene Gesserit as the idea of what they want for the world. And I just think it's this might be a bit controversial. It's just a great parallel to, real life and how, the Catholic Church for many a century sort of just controlled different types of governments and still kind of control governing bodies and, the East and also the West, especially some states in America where there's supposed to be a separation between the church and state, but a lot of state officials keep using religious ideas to, write off laws and all that. And I just think it's a great...
But even still look at our laws, right, between church and state. There is that separation, but also most of the laws and morality we grew up with were based in Christian teachings.
Exactly.
It's still a fundamental part of our society, even if it's officially separated.
Yeah.
They ingrain themselves so deeply, they can't fully be pulled out of it.
Exactly. And that's kind of what the Bene Gesserit are as well. They're like the representation of this... excuse me. They're the representation of their world's version of the church in our world. I just think the writing's so good and the ideas are so strong with just, not even just Paul, but just the Bene Gesserit's control over everybody, especially the Emperor, who is he's the Emperor of the entire galaxy. Yeah. Which is nuts.
I just like its commentary on religion, that religions are essentially stories that are so oft repeated that people just eventually believe them to be true. At first, they were just stories okay, yeah, I'll tell a story about this guy or that guy. And then with enough time passing, people are like, no, it's literal. It happened exactly that way. There wasn't any artistic license in that at all, just for, entertainment value. We're just we got to tell a story in a way that'll make people listen. No, it literally happened that way. Exactly. It's oh, okay. Except the Bene Gesserit did it intentionally. They're trying to make the Fremen think this is a literal thing that's going to happen. They implanted the seed of this religion and just made them tell it so often that they believed it to be true. And then they made it true.
Yeah, because that's what, people did back in the day. Just saying. Yeah. Especially when people came over to North America and how they manipulated the Native Americans to do whatever they want. I think there's a famous story. It's I think it's Christopher Columbus or something, or one of the explorers. No, it was Christopher Columbus. He was I need you to trade land for me and I want this land. It's like, we don't want to give you the land. It's like, if you don't give me the land in about a week, my God will turn the moon blood red, and that will prove my God's more powerful than yours.
Right. It's because he had more knowledge.
Again, what the natives didn't know, he was an astronomer. So and then cycle. Of course, blood turned red. And then all the natives were like, oh my God, his God's way more powerful. And just the manipulation of that. It's like, no, it's just science. It's just this actually happened. It's like, no, his God's more powerful. And it's just, the Bene Gesserit kind of reminds me of stories like that.
Knowledge is power. You use what you know to get what you want.
Power is power. Sorry, that's a Game of Thrones quote.
Yeah. But Dune is about colonialism as well. Because the Fremen they're people who lived on Arrakis, and they have their own religions and culture, and they have that thing with the temple. I really like their religion is kind of about the conservation of water. Everyone who dies, the water returns to Arrakis until one day they hope to remake the oceans there. It's a really
that was pretty cool.
Beautiful idea. But it's also everyone colonizes Arrakis because of their resources, and they subjugate the Fremen. And whether it's Atreides or Harkonnen or whoever, the Fremen know they're the subservient people, and that's why they're fighting for freedom. They just got lucky that, like, they could just have easily been fighting the Atreides, but the Harkonnens are just actually bad, and that Paul found a gap there that he's like, okay, I'm actually on your side here. But it's also interesting that, they talk about the white savior trope, right? Paul and Jessica are basically that, but it's a subversion of that, because we're not 100% supposed to be on their side. Usually in the white savior stories, it's like, well, obviously the white guys know what they're doing, and like, why do we even question that? But here, we know there is a bit of manipulation happening. Not so much with Paul at first. That doesn't come until more later, when he embraces his role as the Messiah. But with Jessica especially, they kind of put her, like, their spiritual leader dies, and then they let this outsider take control of their people just because she's the only other one with religious knowledge. It's like, well, how did that happen? And some of the Fremen who are less religious are like, why is this outsider in charge of us now? That's wrong. And they're all suspicious of Paul too, because they're like, what's this rich boy who's not even from this planet fighting alongside us for? Except he has to gain their respect and ingrain himself within their culture, learn their ways, and through that, he gains their respect. And then when he's revealed as the Messiah, then they'll follow him unquestioningly. So that's a way to go about colonialism. You can either attack by force and take people over, but that leads to the situation you have in the first place, where the Fremen feel subjugated and they fight back. Or you can do what Paul and Jessica did. You can worm your way in from the inside, gain their trust, be indispensable to them as soldiers or leaders or whatever they needed from you until you take charge. And then that's it. You're in charge now. And yeah, it's a really interesting way how they break down just colonialism, how that happened. There's the oppressive forces, and then there's the ones from the inside.
Yeah, it's like the most perfect way of depicting that on screen. And yeah, it's funny when you bring up the white savior trope, because there was this famous TikTok going around of this one person being like, this movie's all about white savior thing, and then someone duetted it right away and was like, there's never been a bigger example of someone who hasn't seen this movie or read the book, because it's like, on the outside, it looks like a white savior thing, but what it really is, it's colonialism. It's the guy just worming his way to like gain the trust of the people, and then through religious farming and religious beliefs being thrown and tricking the Fremen, It's like
Well, what I
it's
think
not
it
really
is
saving. It's them.
yeah,
It's him manipulating an entire culture and using that religious belief to gain what he wants. He's not really saving them. He's taking control of their entire belief system.
and leading them to another war. Yeah.
And yeah, leading them to another war. So it's not even about him being a white savior. It's about the manipulation and the tactics that religion can have on a quote unquote less civilized population, and how a man who comes from money, power, ultimate knowledge, has high IQ, all that shit, high education, I should say, highly skilled in combat, and how he uses all those skills to weave his way to the top of this, again, lesser civilization and to gain power for himself. It's not about him being a white savior. It's about his manipulation tactics into becoming, into gaining what he wants, and that is power. It's not him saving the Fremen. It's him gaining what he wants and seeking revenge.
Yeah. To me, that's the difference between other white savior stories and Dune, is that other white savior stories don't question it at all. The white savior just is what they are. But in Dune, he's nearly presenting himself as a white savior, but the book is saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the whole book and the whole idea of Dune is, and I love it.
So that's why you could say, yeah, it's a white savior story. It is, except it's saying it's a bad thing, and that's why it's subversive when it was written 60 years ago.
You can say it's a white savior story only because you haven't read the book or seen any of these movies. I understand what you're saying, but it's not at all. It's not that whatsoever.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. It is, but it's saying it's bad.
I'm saying it is.
The characters. Yeah. No, I'm saying it is, but the characters are presenting themselves that way. It's a commentary on it. It's like it's doing exactly what a white savior story does, except it's got the self-awareness to realize what it's doing. It's not. Sorry, you muted.
Sorry, there was just some shit on my screen and I was wiping it away.
Oh. Yeah. I mean, you could say it isn't. I think it is, but it's got meta commentary on it. It's a commentary on it by doing the thing.
Yeah, it's a commentary on white saviorism, but it itself is not. He is not a white savior. A white savior,
no, he is
someone who is coming in to a civilization and saving the entire civilization, and him being a white savior.
Yeah,
and the whole thing, he's just. Because he's doing the manipulation from the religion being fed to these civilizations for centuries. That's not white saviorism.
No, I'm just saying.
It's not him being in the manipulation. It's a commentary on white saviorism, but Paul himself is not a white savior. I think if we keep saying that...
Isn't. That the only difference is in the ending. The whole thing follows the exact track of a white savior story until the end when he actually screws them.
Because it's a commentary on white saviorism. He himself is not a white savior. If you go out there and you tell everybody, oh, Paul's a white savior, that's going to make people not want to watch this fucking movie or read the books. Because he himself is not a white savior. He is... What's the word for colonialism, but like for one person? Colonist? Is that what it is? I don't even remember.
Yeah. He's a colonist, yeah.
Yeah, he's an infiltrator. He's a bad person, but... he's doing it for selfish goals, but you understand his goals because his entire family was almost wiped out. His entire, culture was almost wiped out. His entire, I guess, his civilization was almost wiped out with all his
whole family.
Parents almost. Excuse me. Get a little. I just had breakfast. They're, his army who are also technically his friends. He has friends who were murdered. So he's on the path to vengeance. So he sees, oh, here's a civilization that are being force-fed this religion that I am Al-Khabib. I can't pronounce the whole thing. It's because I don't remember it. Is Al-Khabib? Al-Khabib? Muad'Dib, yeah. Kangaroo mouse. Yeah. Lizal Al-Khabib, I don't remember. And he's like, oh, I don't, but wait, I can't do that because that would be wrong. And gaining power through that is wrong, but it's the only way to do it. So I'm going to do that. It's not him saving, it's him indoctrinating himself, manipulating these forces and gaining power. He's not saving anybody. He's taking control.
Yeah. Although you could also argue that he did give them exactly what they wanted as well. He just led them to a worse. Hey, look, you opened up this debate. I'm going to debate it. He did give them what they wanted. They wanted freedom from the Harkonnens. He did that. He just led them worse to something even worse later on. It's more complicated. I'm just saying, it's more complicated than black and white. It's not a white savior story, but it's not a white savior story. It's got elements of a white savior story, but it also ends differently than those stories tend to. That's
because it's a whole commentary on how white savior stories are terrible.
But they do that by doing exactly what they all do, and then giving it a different ending. Because usually the idea is, yeah, we've gone through it enough. I think it's the bedrock is there. It's trying to trick you into thinking. It's trying to trick the audience into thinking that's what it is until it isn't.
Okay.
Anyway. What else?
Zendaya's pretty good.
Oh, she's great. Yeah, she's a very nuanced character. I really liked her performance in it.
At first, I was a little confused on why she was so pissed at Paul for like taking control, but then also I remembered it's her people. It's like he sees Paul for what he is, but she's in love with she's in love with who Paul is before he has this whole flip to him after, he goes through the worm juice ceremony and starts seeking power because she's like, oh, that's not who you truly are, blah, 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 or something like that. That's the subtext I got from it. But also it's bringing war to her people but not through the Fremen's ways, but through the Atreides way, which she doesn't like. And it's just going to bring more war towards her people, especially at the very end, spoiler alert, the Holy Wars or whatever, with all the other grand houses. So her character is very interesting, I would say.
She does say at one point...
Because she never fully believes, she never believes at all in the prophecy. And she can see through the manipulation of the Bene Gesserit and through what Paul is doing.
I think she does tell him at one point that, I'll paraphrasing here, but I'll love you always as long as you stay who you are. And it was a betrayal for her when he starts embracing those Messiah ways, because she knows the more fundamentalists among the Fremen are going to eat that right up.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, why are you playing into this? That's not right. Even if you do have these powers, and like, even if you are what they think you are, you're taking advantage of it.
Yeah, she's more on the morally like good side of things. And she doesn't want to have like manipulation tactics be used on her own people, which is understandable. Yeah, it's just, I think she's a great character. I think Zendaya put on like an excellent performance.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what they do in a part 3 or even 4.
From what I've heard, she's very different than she is in the book. This is one of the big changes.
Probably, yeah.
Because from what I've heard in the book, Chani is not necessarily subservient to Paul, but she stands by him the entire time, basically unquestioningly. The movie version just kind of gave her more independence. And to say, oh, well, I'm with you until you changed. And then everyone else can go along with that, but I'm not really about that. I did like that he still loved her though, and he even said, "Well, yeah, I'll love you
yeah.
always." And then he, and then he tried
Let
to
me marry
arrange a
Florence
marriage to the
Pugh.
princess. Yeah, yeah. Let's do a
funny.
political marriage.
I think I knew by like Florence Pugh's third or second scene. I was like, they're gonna try to marry her off to Paul. I was like, and the storylines weren't even lined up yet, or even heading that direction. I was like, they're gonna get engaged. I just know it. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And then it did. But that's from my years of watching endless amount of film and television and film school and acting classes. Just knowing when things are going.
I suppose that's also another commentary on colonialism. You can fall in love with one of the natives. You can have a relationship, but in terms of legitimate society, that's not who you're supposed to end up with. You're supposed to end up with one of your own, is what
Well, it's another thing too, and it's more touched on in the book that Paul's dad and mom were technically never married because she's not part of one of the great houses. So Paul's dad always stayed unmarried in case he needed to marry someone else from one of the great houses. And so now Paul's marrying the princess, which puts him pretty high up there in high society. Yeah. I think it's a great. It's another like medieval times thing, or Game of Thrones type-esque political drama as well, of not marrying for love, marrying for political and powerful gain. It was a neat little thing. I wish I got more of Florence Pugh, but we'll probably see more of her in the third movie.
Potentially.
Oh, and that's at least what Denise said. When selling it to Florence, it was like how part one is with Zendaya, how that's like a character introduction to her, but the second movie, she's in it a lot. It's kind of the same with Florence. Part two is an introduction to the princess, and then part three, if they do it, which they probably will, because this is a major success.
Yeah.
She'll be in it a lot more. However, I've heard Dune Messiah is fucking weird, dude. It's a weird movie.
I've heard they're all weird.
Or book.
This.
Yeah. They go, like, one of a descendants of Paul becomes, like, a fucking worm god for 4,000 years. It's absolutely insane. I don't know. Like, that's what I'm concerned about with when they do a part 3 or 4. Like, how long can they keep going, and will they stick to the book that hard? Like, will they go that weird with it? And a part of me wish they will. I also want to see, like, I don't know what they want to do with it.
What Justin tells me, having read all the books, he says that they can probably get away with going up to the third book, Children of Dune. And what he always tells me is God Emperor of Dune, the fourth one, is the best one in the whole series, but would make the worst movie possible. He's like, absolutely nothing happens in that book. So he says it's basically just the Emperor sitting in his basement musing to himself, from what I've heard. But it's the best one, apparently. So they can get away with going up to Children of Dune. But then that's the other problem, right? All the other Dunes after that take place hundreds or thousands of years at a time afterwards. Massive time jumps. If they ended at Dune Messiah, that's okay, because I think that's the end of Paul's story, and then the next one's.
I think that's where they'll
further
end
ahead.
it.
Yeah. If they want to keep going, they could. I mean, you cast Anya Taylor-Joy as Paul's sister, so I'm sure she'll have more to do in the future ones.
My reaction when I saw her on screen, I was like, of course it's fucking Anya Taylor-Joy. Just like, who do we get? We need a young female actress who's sort of around Timothée Chalamet's age. Oh yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy. It's like, well, we already have Florence Pugh and Zendaya. Who's another big name actress? Oh yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy. It's like, of course it's her. But I'm excited. Yeah. She's very good. Yeah,
that was actually surprising to see her, because that didn't leak at all, that she was cast in the movie.
That's pretty crazy. It
was a good cameo.
Yeah, I wonder how long she was on set for. That's always what I always wonder when actors get like a cameo like a quick cameo in a movie and they're in for like one scene or even 10 seconds of a scene. I'm like, that's got to be just a day, right? Hopefully that's just a day of shooting.
I think she was only in literally one shot.
Yeah.
And was it her
Which is
voice the
nuts.
whole time?
Um,
I don't remember.
I'm going to assume so, like around that time it was her voice, like around the reveal. Who knows if probably not even like the shots beforehand where they're leading up to who it is, where it's like the back of her walking away. That's probably a stand-in because it's Hollywood, and Anya Taylor-Joy is a very busy person. So
Lately, yeah. What did we think of Christopher Walken as the Emperor?
he's okay. Felt like they could have had like a more. Now Christopher Walken is Christopher Walken. He's excellent at who he is and how he plays. I just feel like they needed to be like a more commanding presence with the Emperor. Like I needed to have like sort of like a President Snow-esque level of charisma around him or something. I don't know. I didn't feel like this guy's at the very top and he's the most threatening person in the universe.
But that's the thing. He's not. Because having him be more commanding, that would nearly undersell the Bene Gesserit's influence on him. Because they're really the ones in charge. He's just the figurehead, really.
Yeah, but he's also too meek at the same time. Like, I feel more threatened by the princess than him. Yeah. Just strange. It's not a bad choice. I feel like
that's also what happens in these things, right? Rulers maybe at one time are imposing and get people on their side, but at a certain point, everyone gets older and frailer and loses the influence they used to have. And that's why there's so much issues under his rule now. If he was maybe a couple decades younger, I don't know if Paul's attack with the Fremen would have, destabilized the entire political system of the galaxy.
I didn't want like a younger actor. I just wanted someone like a bit more like charismatic.
No, I'm just saying the Emperor being a little older and meeker sets the stage well for just the absolute crumbling of this system. If he was a little more on the ball, none of this might have happened. Maybe.
I guess. I don't know. I just would have seen probably like, I don't know, maybe like an Ian McKellen or Charles Dance. That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Plays a villain in Game of Thrones. He's also in the Imitation Game. I don't know. I thought Walken did okay. I just didn't like fully believe that he was a threat, like at all. And he helped the Baron like kill the Atreides, so I just didn't buy it sometimes. That's okay.
Yeah, I suppose he's an emperor more for political backroom dealings than he is for brute force. Like, I let guys like the Harkonnens handle that stuff. I'll broker it, but I'm not going to do it myself. Yeah. I also like how Dune Part 2 humiliated Dave Bautista. Because he's the villain from the first movie, and then Austin Butler throws him down at his feet. Kiss my feet. Do it.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. And his fight scene with Gurney is literally like 3 moves. I thought that was pretty genius. Where it's like he's this big, brooding, tough guy, but he's not really that skilled. His like only strength is his strength and his size, but he doesn't really have that much skill.
Yeah. Sure. I also really like the mature story and dialogue. I'm used to everyone sounding like children in movies nowadays. Everyone's whiny and emotionally vulnerable to the point of basically toddlers throwing tantrums or crying all the time. Or I'm like, oh, these feel like adults making tough decisions. And yeah, some of them are like Paul and Johnny are emotionally vulnerable with each other, but they're still, they don't act like children in love. It feels like a, mature romance, I keep saying, but that's the word.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's very much like I think Paul's supposed to be like 15 or 16 in the book, but their romance feels very adult and it feels very um, natural. Even though Johnny like sees through Paul like from the very beginning, there's
Yeah.
just this un you know like unmistakable attraction that she just has to him, and it
Yep.
just blossoms into a pretty good romance.
It's a romance based on respect more than attraction, which I think
Yeah,
maybe that's what I'm trying to think why it's better than most I see. Because he actually wins her over by being respectful of her culture and,
yeah,
riding the sandworm and fighting the good fight for her people and taking orders from guys like Stilgar. And, he is this nobleman, but he doesn't act like it. And
yeah. Well said.
and for his part, she's just this badass warrior who does see through him. He is a nobleman. She doesn't treat him that way, and I think he likes that too. Because she's just real with him. She doesn't treat him like a messiah or a nobleman. She just sees Paul Atreides. For better
Yeah,
and for worse.
I think that's what she loves about him too. Is that like I don't see you as this messiah. I don't see you as Muad'Dib. I see you as Paul. The man I fall in love with. So don't be anything but Paul. You don't have to be anything but that. It's a heartbreaking tale from her perspective to see the man she loves sort of manipulate her people into getting this ultimate power, and then the final shot is her getting ready to ride a sandworm to who knows where, which I thought was an interesting way to end the movie. It kind of reminded me of Spider-Verse in a weird way, the second one, where it ends on Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, get ready for the third one, but it's two different storylines.
That reminds me of a half complaint I have with this movie. The ending did leave me unsatisfied when I walked out of the theater. Just that ending on Johnny about to ride the sandworm, I'm like, oh, that's it? No even text card, and then Paul's holy war raged across the galaxy. Nothing at all, huh? And then I thought
Yeah,
about
because we're
it.
setting up for part 3.
Okay, I don't know how the movies are going to go, but according to Justin, who's read the books, Dune Messiah basically starts with the holy war already over. It's the aftermath of it. So I don't know if the movies are going to show any of that or stick closer to the books, but assuming they do skip all over it, I also was okay with the ending after thinking about it a little further, because I realized they didn't show us anything, but the entire movie, Paul is worried that if I go to the south, there will be calamity. Millions, billions maybe might die because of what I'll do once I get down there. And that's enough. The entire movie for the whole 3 hours is telling you what happens when Paul does the thing. And then he did the thing. We don't necessarily need to see the thing. We know. They told us the ending without showing us the ending.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm like, oh, but what happens next? I know.
War for Planet of the Apes.
Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Comes out.
Theme park for Planet of the Apes. Wait, what? No.
I'm
That
excited
comes
for
out, I
Kingdom of
think,
the Planet of the Apes.
July or something? June?
Getting hyped.
Comes out in the summer. Or May.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's later. It's coming out later.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you have any more to say on this movie, but personally, it's a masterclass in everything you can do in film. Every element of movie making was done about as well as it can be. Everything from set design, acting, score. Oh, the score was incredible as well. I felt it in my bones. And the sound design,
It's a pretty damn good movie.
Yeah.
Did you get the popcorn bucket?
I did not.
Yeah, I don't think they're sold at Cineplex. I think it was an AMC thing.
No,
So
I saw
we
it.
don't have that up here.
I saw the
Is it a
buckets
Cineplex
there.
thing?
Well, yeah, I did see the buckets there when I went.
Interesting.
I saw some people
Never mind.
get it. Yeah.
Oh, wait, are they owned by the same company? I actually don't know.
I don't think
Hold
so.
on a second.
Yeah, well, Dune Part 2 is a film you got to watch as soon as possible if you haven't already. I'm actually seeing it again tonight in 70mm IMAX because the first time I didn't get a chance to see it in IMAX, but doing that.
Theaters formerly operated by the company are now operated by Cineplex Entertainment in Canada and as AMC Theaters. Okay. So it's like they're owned by one company, but it's not AMC or Cineplex. It's like they're the children of one company.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay. Interesting. So it's kind of like Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm are completely separate things, but they're owned by Disney.
Yeah. Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
We figured it out through the popcorn bucket.
Yeah. So, we got any more to say, or should I go on to the question of the week?
Now you can ask your question.
Hi. So, turns out I did have more to say after all. I just came back from the movie. This is Joe from the near future. And I had a striking realization as I watched it. That scene when Paul drinks the poison and he's dying, and then Chani, the desert tears, revives him with her tears. I'm convinced now he was faking it in order to make everyone think the prophecy was real. Because as I was watching it, I thought about it a little harder, and then I realized, wait a minute, we know this prophecy's made up. So what would her tears have any bearing on this situation? What we do know, however, is the Bene Gesserit, Lady Jessica specifically, have the power to transmute the poison inside their bodies to render it harmless. Paul mentions this earlier in the movie. Paul does not know this ability at the start of the movie, but let's assume for a second, make a little bit of a leap, that Lady Jessica taught him this power. All right, so now we know he might be able to transmute the poison. Next, the scene where he drinks the poison, we don't see him collapse, we don't see him quote-unquote die. The next thing we see is the lady who makes the poison. She contacts Lady Jessica and says, Paul drank the poison. And Lady Jessica says, well, who else knows about this? And the one lady says, no one else, just you. So, Paul might be able to negate the effects of the poison. He drank it, having chosen to become the Messiah by this point. And Lady Jessica, the one who's been pushing him to be the Messiah all this time, is the only one to know he drank it. And then the next scene is a crowd gathered around Paul's dead body, where Chani comes into the room asking what happened. And it's Lady Jessica who says his vital signs are so low, you can't even tell he's alive. And then Chani cries and revives Paul. Paul says, I couldn't have done this without you. She slaps him and walks out of the room. First time I watched this scene, I thought, oh, that's nice of him. He's thanking her. And she's slapping him and going away angry because he played into the prophecy thing that he promised he wouldn't do. But now upon rewatch, I realized that gap there was probably Paul planning with Lady Jessica to create this entire scene to manipulate Chani into thinking he died, to get those desert tears of the prophecy, so everyone in that room can see her place the tears on him and revive him, so that they can proclaim to everyone there that the prophecy went off as written. And that's when Chani realizes that he manipulated her, that Paul is no longer who he says he is, and she realizes what that will mean for her people. All right, that's my spiel. Back to the episode. Will Dune, after its completed trilogy, be held in the same high esteem as Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
It all depends on how the third movie goes, but I'm already going to say with the first two, yes. It is basically a modern version of Star Wars for this generation and kids younger, and it's already a huge boom and
By
all
being
over
the thing
social
that inspired
media.
Star Wars, ironically.
Yeah. And it's already hit with the younger generation. So yeah, I think again, all depending on how the third movie goes, it'll be up there in some of the one of the best trilogies of all time, especially a modern film. It's already the best like duology film. So
yep, I agree to an extent. I don't think it's going to be held in regard now, because nowadays everyone's tribalistic about their nostalgia. Well, nothing will ever top Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. Those movies are S tier. Those will never be beat, ever. Not even matched, not even close. And then I think in 20 years, people who grew up with Dune, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings will be like, no, they're all on the same level. In terms of craft, they're all on the same level.
Yeah.
But now nostalgia's blinding to Dune. People can appreciate it for being great now, but they're not willing to say it's as good as the thing you loved when you were a kid. I think that's something it'll have to shake out with some time. But yes, I think it will.
Yeah, it's definitely on its way. I don't.
Yeah.
The third movie would have to collapse so hard, which I don't think is going to happen, because Denis Villeneuve is an expert filmmaker. This is his passion project, his like magnum opus trilogy, like his dream thing. So there's just no way. I don't believe in the collapse of Denis, because I don't think he's failed. He's literally hasn't failed yet. He's made only fantastic movies.
I haven't seen all his movies, but I've liked every one I've seen.
Yeah, he's an expert filmmaker. He's going to be regarded as one of the best modern directors, up there with Christopher Nolan. There, I said it.
Yeah,
the guy just won a couple Academy Awards a couple days ago, but I think he's up there. Dare I say, I'm not going to say better. No, hold on. I almost said it, and then Denis hasn't had that big of a filmography yet, but he's close. They're like this far apart.
Yeah, I'm not going to say better, but from what I've seen of the two, I think he's nearly more versatile. I think he tells different, more varied kinds of stories than Nolan.
Yeah.
What Nolan does is great, but he's a bit more narrow in focus.
That's true.
Oftentimes. Anyway, plug your socials.
You can find me at Ryan Walker Official on YouTube, TikTok, and on Instagram.
You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at ThoughtPlane Media. Also, check out the Close Up with Ryan and Joe Facebook page for latest updates on the show. If you listen to us in audio, check out our YouTube channel. And if you're on YouTube, find us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. We hope to see you on the next Close Up with Ryan and Joe, where we do another leisure list. May thy knife chip and shatter. Till next time.
As it is written.